Hello, my name is Loren and today I'm presenting my research findings on how the increasing exposure of the fashion industry influenced fashion in the 90s. So within the 90s, the industry had to significantly adapt to social and economic changes that significantly impacted supply and demand at the time. The dawn of the digital age created a desire to directly emulate celebrities, icons, people that were seen on screen and in publications at the time. So I conducted a small questionnaire to a number of people that were around during the 90s era, and my results suggested that the multifaceted exposure of the fashion industry was significant enough for them to remember different icons of the time, their favourite magazines. One of the questions was also whether or not they bought a piece of clothing that directly emulated a celebrity, for example. I also found that from the results that the access to the media further encouraged them to be much more acutely aware of social and cultural happenings at the time as well. However, this questionnaire would need to be replicated on a much larger scale just to improve its validity. So celebrities and models and anybody on screen as well, are still massively emulated in society today, but on a much smaller scale of what we call now in terms of influencers. But celebrity culture is more rife than ever before. The industry, from what I researched, seemed to go from a selected elite that were invited to fashion shows and things, for example, that reported back and carefully created trends, that suddenly zoomed to this new digital age where everyone with any interest in fashion whatsoever suddenly had access to it through all these different types of media outlets. So that went from street style through to high fashion. And this is what placed unprecedented demands on the industry. So not only was the consumer changing the way they wanted to have access to fashion, the industry now had to suddenly adapt to make sure that it could provide for this demand and desire. So they suddenly had to create more collections. They needed constant sources of inspiration. They needed to change their ways they were doing marketing because they needed digital campaigns, magazine campaigns, for example. So the digital age really allowed designers to push to find their own voice, to find their own niche, and push this through a number of different outlets despite the pressures of supply and demand at the time. But these pressures still exist today. We still plan ahead. We still use trend forecasting all the time. However, I do think that now we look to fashion history a lot for inspiration. For example, in the last few years, the 90s have actually been a really key area of revival. I do think that this revival, from my research, could be a response to the exhaustive influencer culture in which everyone is trying to be a street style star. So the calmness and purity that was sort of represented in the 90s could be a way of stripping back now, and that's why we could be seeing the minimalism that we are now as well. So research also suggests that the increased exposure of the industry in the 90s kickstarted what we now refer to as fast fashion, with fads and trends coming along so quickly in line with an all-accessible line of products. Like we're now in this century trying to find a way to reverse all the damage that has been done and try to be practicing much more sustainable processes and everything, for example, now. However, in terms of today, future design practice should look to adopt sustainable processes wherever possible, as the instant access that we currently have to the fashion industry is not slowing down. And we can only hope that with the immersive online cultures supporting the brand relationships and the culture that we have now, that sustainability could hopefully influentially prevail.